there is a really beautiful and unique opportunity to bring the one person who you feel has helped to make you the rabbi you are, somebody who you have learned from and want to continue to learn from. And so it's my pleasure to invite up our Rabbi Jeremy Barras to introduce who that person is for him.
Good Shabbos. I've had many teachers along the way, some who have been challenging and some who have been quite challenging. And I've always found that the ones who push you the hardest are the ones from whom you have which most to learn. Sometimes over the years in classes that I have taught, someone will say to me, you know, when you said this, it really clicked with me. And they'll say, you know, do you remember that? I say, oh, sure. I usually don't. And I imagine that some of the things that Rabbi Jonathan Cohen, Ph.D., taught me, and some of the exchanges that we had, he does not remember, but I certainly do. One of them came when, during an introduction to Talmud class that I was taking with him, part of the class involved a somewhat intimidating oral exam where you had to read from the Talmud, translate, explain in Aramaic. And when I was finished reading, he looked at me and said, Jeremy, if I was someone who only spoke Aramaic, I would have no idea what you are talking about. There were others. But with his warmth, humility, knowledge, and care, he inspired me to understand that if I wanted to be a real rabbi, I had to authenticate it with true Jewish knowledge. And if I had to say one characteristic that defines me most, I hope, as a rabbi, will be my love of learning our sacred texts. Dr. Jonathan Cohen is an Israeli-born scholar. He was appointed assistant professor in Talmud and Halachic literature at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati in July 1988, and director of the Hebrew Union College of Cincinnati Center for the Study of Ethics and Contemporary Moral Problems in January 2002. In November 2003, he was awarded the Rabbi Michael Matchison Professor of Emerging Scholars, and he was named affiliate member of the Laboratoire, something in French, in August 2005. He now serves as the Dean of the Rabbinic School in Cincinnati. His interests include history of law, law and religion, in particular the evolution of Jewish law in Christian Europe. He read law at the University of Kent, Canterbury, and earned his Ph.D. in law from the University of Liverpool. His research focused on the evolution of restitution as a civil remedy in medieval Jewish law. And at the Oxford Center for Hebrew and Jewish Studies, he was the first David Patterson Junior Fellow in Jewish Law. To be honest, I don't know what a lot of that means, but I do know that he inspired my love of Talmud, my love for Talmud Torah, and my desire to make the wisdom and the texts of the Torah define my entire life. It's one of the greatest honors I've ever had to introduce to you Rabbi Jonathan Cohen, Ph.D.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Rabbis, thank you. Rabbi Baumgart, a special thank you. And thank you, Rabbi Barras, for this amazing introduction. I really should sit down now. Thank you for this extraordinary service, for the beautiful music, for all that this evening represents, and for the opportunity to be part of it. And especially to be part of it this evening, on this Shabbat. On this Shabbat, wherein we encounter Jacob in the midst of yet another journey. Jacob, who leaves Beersheba at the beginning of this Torah portion that we study this week, and who makes his way to his ancestral Haran, which we identify with Huran, Syria. The same troubled Syria. Jacob, who now yet again makes his steps through a difficult, a troubled land in search for family, in search for security, in search for livelihood, leaving behind a troubled family. On his way, he stops in a location called Luz. And it is there in that occasion when the sun sets, Imbo Hachama, when the sun sets, that he collects a few stones to sleep upon them. Have you ever seen a person collect stones to sleep upon them? And he falls asleep on these stones. And in his dream, resting on these stones, he sees a ladder. And angels marching up and down the ladder, and there in his dream, he receives a blessing that we will have occasion to speak on in greater detail tomorrow. And he wakes up from that dream, and he renames that place wherein his earthly journey, his voyage for a livelihood, for well-being, for family, for a decent life, meets his search of meaning and his search for transcendence. He names that place Beit El. We name the place Beth Am. And the word Beit El, the name Beit El, is a curious name. Because there was no bite there. He placed stones on the ground. There was no house. Bait means house. It means structure, which the rabbis comment on. And I know you're here to listen to me for about an hour and a half. We're going to go over that on another occasion. That, ladies and gentlemen, was the first Beit El, the first house of God, and the first Beit Am, the first house of what would become a people. And at that moment, our forefather Jacob would become the precursor to every rabbi who would follow. Ladies and gentlemen, the task of the rabbinate is defined in the words of this Torah portion and of this biblical story. The role of the rabbi is to connect the personal journey for well-being, for livelihood, for family, for warmth, with the search for meaning and transcendence in community. That is the task that Jacob takes upon himself. It is especially meaningful today to celebrate the installation of Rabbi Jeremy Barras. Indeed, following the receipt of this blessing from God, Jacob seems to negotiate. He says to God, if God gives me nourishment to eat, to consume, and clothing to cover myself, ochel le'echol uveged lilbosh, if God cares for me in my coming and going, the Lord Adonai will be my God, and I will worship him. The call of every Reformed Jew who came upon these shores, who made it to this country, and who said to himself, herself, and their families, we have come here to do well. We have come here to gain food. Food not to put in the refrigerator. Food not to use for aesthetic purposes. Food to eat, to sustain ourselves. Clothing not for the closets, not for the cabinets. Clothing to eat. Education to advance ourselves. The kind of work that will enable us to generate meaning in our lives and contribute to this country. The ability to advance our children. The ability to move forward. These people, 6 decades ago, made it here and established Beit Am. This Beth El, that is also a Beit Am. Rabbis, like Jacob, follow their own journey. You know, the installation of a rabbi is a bizarre term, kind of a plumbing term. I've never really installed a rabbi. I really don't know very much about plumbing. I wouldn't trust myself with that. I don't think it's quite about plumbing or about construction. It really, as one of our teachers has taught, is about one rabbi placing another rabbi in their proper place. Rabbi Jeremy Barras comes from a rabbinic family. Rabbi Jeremy Barras grew up in a household in Pennsylvania with the image of a grandfather who was a rabbi and a communal leader and a scholar and a mentor and a teacher, a dedicated rabbi who grew up in a household with a love of Israel, with a love of Judaism, with a love of learning, and developed a love of golf. Rabbi Jeremy Barras went on to pursue his passions with the security and the assurance that he could change the world. And went off to Israel and went off to study and came back and continued to improve his Hebrew, his language skills, his text skills, and his connections with Eretz Israel and Medinat Israel. Rabbi Jeremy Barras came back and continued to study and continued to turn it his mission to teach Judaism in order to connect that journey of every Jew in their lives and their search for meaning and for the transcendent. And that journey has led him here, to this moment, as Senior Rabbi of Temple Beth Am. How fortunate this congregation is to have a rabbi at its helm of the stature of Rabbi Jeremy Barras.